all of us has a voice. So we can insert ourselves in conversations with our elected officials. There are local commissions, advisory boards, all types of boards at the state level, at the county level, at the community level, the local level, where people can get involved and really have their voice and expertise valued. That also informs policy decision making. And then, of course, voting is also a way to exercise your power in these policy discussions as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maeve Duggan, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of MassINC. I'm very pleased to welcome you here today with Attorney General Andrea Campbell. Through MassINC's partnership with the GBH Forum Network and our collaboration with the Massachusetts Women of Color Coalition, we are pleased to convene what is the second in a series of public conversations exploring timely issues and featuring diverse voices. This event would not be possible without Charlotte Golar-Ritchie, who unfortunately could not be here today. Charlotte serves as a Greg Torres Senior Fellow at MassINC and leads this event series. All three collaborating organizations, the GBH Forum Network, MassINC, and MAWOCC, are nonpartisan and have a strong civic focus. During this national election season, we are eager to hear from Attorney General Campbell about her focus and work, particularly at a time when voters of all political stripes are called upon to exercise their civic duty. Today's conversation will be led by MAWOCC founding member, President, and CEO, Celia Johnston Blue. Celia is a former state transportation official who was the first Black woman to lead the Massachusetts Registry of Motor Vehicles. As MAWOCC CEO, Celia seeks to elevate the voices, perspectives, and roles of women of color in the Commonwealth. Along with her long-held commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, Celia has 30 years of leadership experience in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. So I am delighted to introduce Celia to facilitate today's conversation with Attorney General Campbell. Celia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Maeve, for that introduction. And this is such an important conversation for us to have with one of our champions of democracy, Attorney General Campbell. I want to start off by thanking you, AG Campbell, for joining us today, and for you in the audience for taking your time to be with us today. We know that you are a busy lady, and I see that you've got all these initiatives you're working on. So I thought it would be fitting for us to start our conversation today with getting a progress report from you. The goals that you and your ambitious pledge, and I quote, is to build economic prosperity and stability, to prioritize the mental health and well-being of children, and to stop the cycles of incarceration and violence, and ensure that people across the state have access to the AG's office regardless of their zip code, language, or ability. How do these goals align with the mission of your office? And can you give us a brief progress report as you shepherd in your welcoming remarks to us?
Thank you, Celia. It's great to see you, and it's great to see all the others who helped organize this. I too want to thank Charlotte as well, who I know couldn't be with us. And I want to thank all those who are participating for participating and joining us in the audience, even though we can't necessarily see everybody. I'm delighted to be here. And I will say my biggest goal has always been to not only put out a strategic plan, which we did, and it is in several languages available on our website, but it's also been to make sure that all of the promises that we made during a campaign, and of course make during in the strategic plan, that we actually realize it, right? We can only direct our human capital and resources in so many places. So the number one focus is to really make sure that people know that we want to focus on people who've ever felt left out and left behind. And I think that includes our poorer communities, our communities in Western Mass, our gateway communities, those who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, marginalized communities, because without a lawyer, without advocacy, it's really tough to get ahead. And so I think we're doing that exceptionally well, just with the focus and being intentional there. We also are hiring into our regional offices. Most folks just know us as having a Boston office. We have a New Bedford office. We have a Springfield office, and we have a Worcester office. And I don't want folks to discount how important those offices are. And so we are hiring into those offices with the goal of reaching that other priority, which is to make sure we're accessible to everyone in all communities across the Commonwealth. And then three other areas I want to quickly highlight is we said we were going to get some new units off the ground. We have done that. So we've gotten a reproductive justice unit, which is new in the office, an elder justice unit, a gun violence prevention unit, a housing affordability unit, and a police accountability unit. All new units designed to be more intersectional and really focused on those issues. And I'm excited for the work ahead with respect to those new units. And then our young people, really important. I'm a mom also of 2 young boys. We're taking on social media companies. We're prioritizing our kids, not just in name, but in action. And just recently was talking about our lawsuit against TikTok and which we just filed in our previous lawsuit against Meta, which is really important. So we're doing a lot, but we're not wasting any time. So delighted to be here with you and encourage folks to check out our website, check out that strategic plan, follow us on X, Twitter, whatever you refer to it as, at MassAGO for more information.
All right, thank you for that. And I should say that we got a lot of questions ahead of time from our audience, and we have selected some of those questions and we'll be weaving them in our conversation with the AG today. So 2 years into the job, are you making the kind of progress on these issues that you had hoped you'd make by now?
Yeah, I'm proud of the progress. And I just said this yesterday as I was encouraging folks to vote in some of our local elections just last night, and how important it is to pay attention to all of our elections, not just the federal ones or the ones that get the most attention, that not only electing good people, but who is sitting in the seat matters, right? And so I say that because for me, it wasn't just about running for attorney general and taking on the job. It was doing it with a sense of urgency and intentionality. You know, as you know, I've lost loved ones to the criminal legal system, parents. My twin brother died, of course, 12 years ago, as you know, while in the custody of a prison setting or system when he was only 29 years old. And so for me, we have no time to waste. And so I'm really proud of the progress we've made in reaching those goals that we've laid out in our strategic plan. I'm proud of the work we're doing, not just on our young people and that next generation of leaders. I'm proud of also the work we're doing in the economic consumer protection context, because I know affordability is the #1 issue that people are talking about. So we are addressing that head on. We're inserting ourselves in the housing fight and making sure people have access to housing. Student loan debt, that is $1 billion issue right here in Massachusetts, affecting millions of residents. So really important to focus on that. We're also focusing on how do we use our tools to close the racial wealth gap. And also, as we're talking about the promotion of economics and taking on scams and those who would scam our folks out of their money, including our elders, how do we also protect those who are formerly incarcerated, who are reentering society? So making sure we're not leaving out anyone or leaving out our rural communities. So I'm proud of the economic portfolio of work. And I actually think in this moment in time when politics can be so divisive, people should be really proud of some of the things we're accomplishing here in Massachusetts and that we're accomplishing in the AG's office on their behalf, regardless of their party, where they live. We serve everybody.
That's great. Thank you for that. And I also saw that you have established the Youth Advisory Council as well.
That's right.
It's really important to get our youth voices at the table. So I wanted to comment on that as well.
I want to lift that up because I so appreciate that you commented on it and you saw the significance. Because one of the things we heard early on when we were crisscrossing the Commonwealth and doing our listening sessions with young people is everything we're talking about disproportionately affects them, or maybe even our elders. And we had an elder advisory council. We have an elder justice unit. We have so much that is, of course, being intentional in our elders, but we don't have young people at the table informing the very work that we do, including on climate justice, environmental justice, gun violence prevention, and so much more. So that Youth Advisory Council is the first in the history of the office and the office has been around for centuries. So I'm proud of the young people that applied and who are serving. So thank you for lifting that up, because they're working hard. They volunteer their time, and they're all students, and they're dedicated to moving the Commonwealth forward, but making sure their voices are incorporated in everything we do. So thank you for lifting them up.
Yes, and of course, our membership starts with high school girls of color. So we absolutely
That's
believe
right.
in that. And we'll be sharing some of that information with our high school girls members that we have as part of our membership network across the Commonwealth. November 5th, Election Day is right around the corner. How does the work of your office impact voters? And how does it differ from the work of our Secretary of State, who we know plays a major role in ensuring election integrity?
We work closely with the Secretary of State in a few different areas. One is to, of course, make sure our elections are fair and that folks can access the ballot, which is critically important. And we're obviously in a better state with respect to that than other states across the country. And I'm proud of the Secretary of State and the work that he and his team is doing. And I'm proud of how we collaborate to ensure that folks have access to the ballot and that our elections are done with transparency and, of course, following the law every step of the way. The Secretary of State's office, along with all of our fabulous and amazing clerks, we cannot discount this human capital that exists all across the Commonwealth. These are folks who are working hard. I often have to remind folks, we have an election every year in Massachusetts. Some folks think, oh, I only vote every other year. Nope, you are supposed to be voting every year, because we have elections every year from the local level, the county level, to the state and federal level. And so you have folks on the ground in all of these communities ensuring that folks have information and access to the ballot. And the Secretary of State, working with these folks, administers the elections, puts out the paperwork, including for our ballot initiatives. Where we come in is to make sure that all election laws are being followed. We review the ballot questions that are proposed and have to go through a very thorough legal process to ensure that those that actually make the ballot are legal. In addition to that, if people are challenging early voting here in Massachusetts or looking to undermine all of the creative tools that we have available to us to access the ballot, including being able to register in person or online, if people are challenging those laws, we defend them, and we defend the Secretary of State in court. And then we take it a step further. We'll work with our Secretary of State, not only here, but we're working with even AGs across the country to ensure that folks have access to early voting, for example, where folks would look to undermine that in other states. We have folks who reach out to us seeking help and guidance, and sometimes legal briefs in support of their arguments as to why these tools are effective in making it easier to vote and for the ballot to be more accessible to everybody.
Right. That's great. That leads me into one of the questions from our audience about explaining how to register to vote. Would you elaborate on that?
That's right. So they can vote in person with the clerk, or it's a local administrator in their respective municipality or community. They can register online as well. And I want to give credit to the Secretary of State in his office. They put these details online, and they're very detailed to make it easier for folks to not only be able to go through the process, but also to be able to register and vote in time for the elections.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. We've heard a lot mentioned about voter suppression and voter accessibility in various parts of the country, as well as the need to ensure election integrity. Are these issues that Massachusetts voters need to be concerned about? And if so, why?
I am 100% confident in how our elections are administered here, and all the steps that the Secretary of State, local officials, along with our office, take in collaboration to ensure that folks have access to the ballot, have their information or any questions answered, information available to them. And we're also going to be releasing some information from our office on Know Your Rights, accessing the ballot for different populations that might have questions. So look out for that very soon. So I'm confident in what we have established here. And of course, there's always more work to do, and there are advocates from all different sides who will encourage us to go a step further to make things easier. And we're always mindful of that and keeping our eyes open. So I just want to stress, though, how blessed we are in Massachusetts when it comes to how our elections are administered and how easy it is for us to go in and to cast our ballot, which is what democracy demands, right? In other states, that's not necessarily the case. And so I'm working with other AGs across the country where we're seeing in other states real intimidation, including sometimes by AGs using the tools of their office, the law enforcement in their office, to go after organizers or folks who are pushing certain people to vote. That is not our job, right? And we, some of us AGs even came together recently to push the Department of Justice to look at what's happening in Texas and what's happening out of that AG's office to intimidate folks who are looking to just register people to vote. So that is a real concern on the ground in so many different states. And we'll use our tools, our power, our best practices here to inform what's happening in these other states, but really blessed to be here in Massachusetts where that's not the case at all.
All right, and we are. And is it fair to say that, over the last, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 years, we've seen a lot, other states are experiencing a lot of different challenges around. So instead of really expanding the right to vote, we're seeing that some states are really shrinking those rights. And we are fortunate to be in the state that we are, but I'm sure we all have family members in other states that might be, experiencing some of that. So it's great to know that, you're part of the larger network that can share how Massachusetts is leading in those, even though there, as you say, there's still more work we need to do, but that we're leading in that area. So thank you for sharing that. So as the country approaches the 60th year of the anniversary of the landmark voting rights, as we're talking about the voting rights and the fact that, that was such a huge landmark law to pass, that, as we know, before that, there were so many states that were discriminating against people of color, women, all of those things. Is your office planning to weigh in, or how are you planning on weighing in on the federal legislation that's namely the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act? And can you maybe talk a little bit about that, how that just go coupled along with the conversation we we're just having about the fact that we are blessed to be in Massachusetts, where we have early voting. The Votes Act was passed. In fact, our organization was one of the coalition members in passing that a couple of years ago. But other states are not so fortunate. In fact, they are seeing unprecedented challenges. Can you talk a little bit about this law, and are you involved in weighing in on it in any way, or planning to? And so folks could know what's happening on the congressional level, that can also help to expand voting rights across the country.
What's happening at the congressional level is important for so many different things, but especially on voting rights. And I have to give credit and homage to John Lewis. And if folks are watching who don't know or didn't know or don't know who this incredible man was, obviously a congressman, but more than that, an activist, right? Someone who was nearly beaten to death crossing the bridge on Selma, right? To make sure that Black people had access to the ballot. It's important to know the John Lewis's. It's also important to know the history of this country, where sadly, the ballot was excluded from so many women, of course, at some point, Black folks. And even when you were afforded the right through some constitutional change, all the tactics that were used in different states to still block access. And so then you have the Voting Rights Act, which is a significant piece of legislation where I think folks often see President Lyndon Johnson, Martin Luther King, and others, when that piece of legislation was signed, significant in being able to afford all of us access to the ballot, which some would argue is the most important tool in any democracy. Put aside everything else, this is critical. If folks do not have access to the ballot in order to have their voices being heard and informing the result, are we really in a democracy? So that's a significant piece of legislation. And sadly, the Supreme Court over time and recently has just gutted that Voting Rights Act and taken away significant tools from the Department of Justice that would allow the federal government to go into communities that have had a history of excluding people from the ballot and using discriminatory practices, that would allow them to be able to hold those folks accountable, to reverse course on those actions, and to get people access to the ballot. And so we're stuck with, okay, what do we do? The John Lewis piece of legislation is that solution. Sadly, of course, Congress has not taken action on this to move it forward and to get it to a president's desk to sign. So there are many folks, I'm publicly in support of this, many are. I would encourage folks to call their congressperson, their senator, to make sure that they have signed on to this piece of legislation. I'd like to think that our folks have, but it's worth checking, right, to find out. And in addition to that, this bill in particular does a whole bunch of things, but it gives federal authorities more opportunity to go. It sort of restores the Voting Act to go into these communities with federal observers to see what's going on the ground, to ensure folks are not being denied access to the ballot, which is critically important because right now in states, that's what's happening. Those intimidation tactics I just mentioned, giving the federal government, the Department of Justice, the tools they would need to go after that. The other piece that is important is oftentimes I think in the news, people are seeing how voting rules and rules of engagement are changing every day. And sometimes you used to be able to go and cast your ballot. Now when you go, you need a photo ID or you need something else. Many of these changes are last minute. This legislation says, no, you have to give folks 180 days more notice so that they can prepare for these changes if they go into effect, to ensure people have all the information they need. They have the resources to go get an ID, for example, if they don't, in order to cast a ballot. So it really does restore the Voting Rights Act that has been gutted, sadly, by the Supreme Court, with the ultimate goal of making sure everyone has access to the ballot, to ensure this country continues to be the democracy it says it is. And there's coalitions all across the country, I think, organizing and pushing. And it's really sad that this John Lewis Voting Act has not been passed even after his passing, because it would have been the best way to honor him. And I don't think it's too late to honor him by getting this passed. So I'm in full support, but it's something that folks should absolutely pay attention to. So thank you, Celia, and your just incredible organization for always lifting up the importance of paying attention to what's happening at the federal level.
Thank you. And thank you for really expanding on that. So folks understand and that the importance of that and just what has happened to the landmark legislation and how that really has been impacting people, communities across the country. So I did have just going a little bit deeper in terms of relating to voting rights and election integrity. Are there myths out there that you would like to dispel?
I think there are many who would suggest that, like here in Massachusetts, everywhere in the country, it's easy to vote. You can go and get some information from your local elected officials. All your questions will be answered. And I think we don't realize how blessed we really are here in Massachusetts, that we can go not just day of, we can go early, we can mail in our ballot. There are different tools that we have to be able to cast our ballot. There's flexibility that we have that other states do not. And so I don't want to discount what is happening across the country right now. So to your point around myths and things, it is harder in other states in this moment in time, in 2024, for folks to cast their ballot as easily as we do in Massachusetts. And what's worse is there are tactics being deployed right now as we're on this Zoom to continue to block folks from accessing their ballot, and even to take it a step further. After they cast their ballot, once the results come in, to then change the rules of engagement on how we certify our elections. So we can cast all the ballots and then get a result, and then call that, and then there's some folks who may want to call that into question. And of course, we have folks out there who are election deniers. That is real. That is not myth. That is fact. And that is scary because it tells me as AG, and I think many other AGs and other lawyers and those who are out there volunteering their time to make sure that people have access to the ballot and legally have access to the ballot, that It's not just a fight about the access to the ballot, the mail-in votes and people having access to that, or early voting, or being able to, of course, go in on the day of the election without having to bring 20 pieces of paperwork, right, that you already submitted to be able to cast your ballot. It's also about the legal process afterwards, and the counting of the ballots themselves, which puts our clerks and local election officials in a place where they shouldn't be. And that's not what we see here in Massachusetts, but that's absolutely what we're seeing in other states. And the intimidation tactics towards these folks who are public servants is not to be discounted. So we're doing our part to show up with other AGs to challenge these efforts and to make sure that folks have what we have here in Massachusetts all across this country. And we've always been a leader. That shouldn't change here as we step out to do some advocacy outside of Massachusetts to continue to lead on these issues.
How are you ensuring that women of color have equal access to voting and a voice in policy decisions?
Different ways. I was actually, and I know this is nonpartisan, so I wanted to stress, I was with someone last night who's running for office and who was a Black woman and supporting this woman. And I stress that because in order to change policy, we do need people at the table. And we need them at all tables, including policy shops within government, sitting at policy tables and informing it. But we also need people to run for office who bring a different perspective. I know, of course, as the first Black woman sitting here in Massachusetts as AG, the first woman of color to win statewide office here, I know I have the ability to inform how the office shows up and how it reflects the stories of everybody. And I mentioned earlier our work to address issues of affordability and making sure that folks don't just have the tools to get their paycheck, taking on wage theft, but we want folks to thrive. And because I've had loved ones entangled with the prison system, and I speak to that with no shame, because I know, frankly, by the grace of God, I sit here, and that so many families have folks who have been incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. In our economic portfolio work, we have not forgotten those individuals. And I know that's because of the lens I bring. So for me, I encourage folks, if you've thought about running for office, run for office. We need more women. We need more women of color to run for office, because we really have to make sure, and I think all of us want this to be true, that our elected offices reflect the constituents we serve. And we still have a lot of work to do. I am extremely proud to be the first woman of color elected statewide in the great Commonwealth. But I also recognize we have work to do if I'm the first. And what does it matter, right, if I'm the first, but don't continue to make sure that others have access and opportunity. So I just encourage folks to run for office, encourage folks to get involved in government. And then lastly, I can't stress this enough, and I think you and your organization, you get this. This conversation, I think, is framed around this. All of us has a voice. So we can insert ourselves in conversations with our elected officials. There are local commissions, advisory boards, all types of boards at the state level, at the county level, at the community level, the local level, where people can get involved and really have their voice and expertise valued. That also informs policy decision-making. And then, of course, voting is also a way to exercise your power in these policy discussions as well.
Yeah, I know. I think we cannot say enough about voting. And, you know, the fact of the matter is we still don't have enough people voting, right? We want everybody to vote. And the reality is that we still don't. And so this is also another reason why we wanted to have this important conversation with you today. And in the political and civic leadership platform, we also have year-round civic engagement work, because we understand, to your point, how important it is, and the fact that there are election cycles every year. And so getting to know your candidates, what they stand for, the values, all of those things are so important. But I wonder if you can share for me, during just your journey and experience, and this feeds into one of the questions we've received, why don't more people vote? And what do you see as the greatest impediments to more voter turnout in Massachusetts?
I think a couple of reasons. There are a couple of reasons why folks don't vote, and I'm always thinking about this because we want to change that. I think number one is the apathy that folks feel, some would say, shame on them. They should be getting involved. They should be voting. I push back on that because there are so many folks I've met in community, some of our poorest communities in Massachusetts, including rural communities out in Western Mass, some communities of color, of course, a whole host of communities where they feel like politicians have come in promising a whole bunch of things and they never see them again. And their lives don't change. And so they don't see the value of voting because nothing in their life is changing. And I think that is not to be discounted. So when I ran for office, I made it crystal clear that we were not going to promise things that we could not, where we couldn't keep that promise. We're not going to eradicate poverty overnight. We are not going to eradicate gun violence overnight. We're not going to address the mental health epidemic overnight. But what I promised constituents is we're going to use every tool in this office to address those issues and to do it with a sense of urgency. And now, in order to continue to build that trust to get people to actually vote, what we find is if we go back out now, including into communities that didn't vote in large numbers, I think we can change that. We can say, now would you take a risk on this candidate, on this elected official, because we said we wouldn't eradicate poverty overnight, but we would do what we could to address it. The student loan debt, for example, we're addressing that. We're wiping out hundreds of thousands of dollars of student loan debt that people are carrying. That is tangible stuff that people can wrap their head around. We're going into communities where their water maybe has toxins in it. And we're saying not only are we getting that corporate entity to clean it up, we're also getting resources from our litigation against that corporate entity, for example, and putting it back into community-based organizations to ensure their water and other environmental projects that they have in their community are funded and gets done. So I think if we start to really remind folks of the power of government, what we can do with our tools to actually help them in their day-to-day life, and then to demonstrate with tangible examples that they can wrap their head around what that actually looks like for them and their families and their communities, more people would vote. But the challenge is, while I may want to do that every single day, and I know other electeds do too, to talk about the value of government, including when addressing systemic inequities. Government created many inequities that we're talking about. They then have a role to unravel those. What I recognize is it's difficult if we can't get our message out to constituents about what we're doing. So the traditional media framework, and no knock to GBH, I'm proud of them sponsoring this conversation. But the challenge is to reach our communities, all of them, is very difficult. We're trying to use social media, traditional outlets. They don't always cover the things the way that we would want to. I would love for folks to know about the student loan debt work we're doing, or the fact we filed a lawsuit against Meta and Instagram to protect their kids. I would love a news outlet to run that every single day. That's very difficult. And then we know local papers, local radio stations where many folks get their news. Those folks are under-resourced. Those outlets are under-resourced, or they're going away because they don't have the resources to sustain them. That's very difficult then for us to get this message out. So it's a twofold challenge for us. One is making sure people know the tangible benefits that government delivers to them. And the second, making sure they know about it and how hard that can be to get that message out. We're an office of close to 700 people, but it's still difficult. And we don't have all the platforms and all the things that we control, right, to be able to get that word out. But this is why this is important, because people hear this interview and then they can share. Did you know the AG's office is doing something on student loan debt, with the hopes that more folks engage with us, and then they see the power of their vote and the power of engaging with their elected official.
And I'm so glad you talked about the engagement piece, because that is really important. Understanding and recognizing that it's very difficult to, as you're doing the work, right, and getting the things done and sort of moving on to the next, because you're certainly looking at all of these initiatives that you're trying to accomplish, then getting that word out is a challenge. But we also have along with our series around kickoff to the ballot box, we also have a series that we call Beyond the Ballot Box. And we developed that because we understand that once people say, yeah, now I've sort of voted and now what? And so we've really tried to work on demystifying the whole concept that you can't reach out to your public official, right? Or I don't even know where to begin. And so I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that, the engagement process for your office and how people could potentially reach out. We do series based on local government, how to even go to a public meeting. If you have an issue in your community, how to certainly file a petition or make sure that you can show up and listen at a public meeting. Just those are the things that we can do, and even listen to a recorded public meeting later that keeps us informed, and then make those appointments to go and meet with our public officials. And I wonder if you could just elaborate a little bit on how people might be able to engage with your office and some of the things that you've put in place and you're hoping to do to make that your office even more accessible and people really know what you're doing that to really benefit them.
It's really important, and I really appreciate your initiative to go beyond the ballot, because I often stress it's one thing to get there, but to govern effectively, you need partnership. And in the AGO, we don't want it to be top down. We want it to be bottom up. I don't want my hundreds of lawyers and staff and incredible public servants to be wasting their time. I want the issues they're working on to be responsive to the needs of the constituents we serve. And the only way that happens is if our residents are engaging with us and telling us what they care about and what they need. Why we're so hyper-focused on all things affordability is because that's what we heard the most. The number one issue that people are talking about is too expensive to live in Massachusetts. Healthcare is too expensive. Daycare is too expensive. When I go to work, I didn't get my paycheck, all things economics and affordability. And so what we told folks is we're going to focus on those. And so when I say we're going to focus on them, what we need people to also do is to engage with us. So there are different ways they can. They can go on our website at mass.gov/AGO. Our strategic plan is there, but even information as to how we're working on those issues is there. They can go on our social media account at MassAGO. And we're constantly putting out information there, including on what your rights are as a homeowner, as a tenant. We just put out a video for our older adults as we put out regulations on assisted living places. We wanted their input into those regulations. In addition to that, as we take on housing and the issue around housing and access to housing and affordable housing, we want their input. So there's so many ways I think that people can get engaged. Our website, social media, they can call the office, 617-727-8400. And this is if they feel like they've been scammed out of their money, or they go to work, for example, and they don't get paid. Wage theft is a major issue in Massachusetts, not just for adults, for our young people. We're prioritizing economics for our kids and making sure that employers are paying our young people. And when we take on those cases, it's usually because a parent called and said, my 15-year-old went to work and wasn't paid, or the child labor laws for that establishment weren't followed, including some actions we've had against Dunkin' Donuts. So we can't do the work effectively if we don't hear from our people. So those are just some ways to engage. And then I'm in community at different moments in time. And that's on social media. We will put that out there, in addition to calendar, things that are out there as well. So we want to make sure that people know where I'm at and where the team is. And then lastly, visit our offices. We have a Boston office, we have a New Bedford office, we have a Worcester office, and we also have a Springfield office. And that information is on our website as well.
Great, thank you. And if people experience any issues with voting, is there a specific process they should follow, or go on the website, or in terms of if they experience any issues with voting, what they should do?
They can go on our website. It probably would be easier just to call our hotline, 617-727-8400. Something more real time, I would encourage folks to call us, or they can reach out to the Secretary of State. And the Secretary of State has his website too. A lot of great information on that website. It's accessible, it's readily available. All of these offices can be found at mass.gov. So whether it's Secretary of State, Attorney General, other constitutional offices, we sort of have a branch off or a slash. But if you visit mass.gov, you can find the Secretary of State or our office and report. And if for some reason they're not hearing back, they can call this hotline as well.
So as you mentioned earlier, that you're in conversations, you are working across the country with other AG's office. So you are a member of the National Association of Attorney Generals. And you've talked about some of the ways that you are working with them specifically around voting rights and other issues. But are there other issues like gun control that you are collaborating with other AGs across the country that we should know about and hear about that work?
Thank you for the question. We are doing a lot, not only with Democratic AGs, Republican AGs. So this particular organization that you mentioned is one of a couple that brings together AGs regardless of their party. We are an active member. We support this organization, and we firmly believe that to be the most effective, you have to put partisanship aside and roll up your sleeves and work in collaboration. And so some of this collaboration has been effective. I mentioned earlier in the conversation our lawsuit against TikTok and Meta, and these are separate lawsuits against two social media platforms that we know harms our kids and that we allege in this complaint will do damage, and we spell out how it does that. This is a multi-state effort. These are AGs from all across the country who have come together to file lawsuits against Meta and separately to file lawsuits against TikTok, because we all believe in protecting our kids and the well-being of our kids. In addition, on the gun violence work, we are at the forefront of that. I'm proud of our gun violence unit, a gun violence prevention unit here in Massachusetts. It's new in the office, but it has hit the ground running. And we are defending our gun laws here in Massachusetts because they are coming for our gun laws, including our assault weapons ban, the recent gun legislation we passed to protect our communities against ghost guns. The list is long. So we're in court every day defending that through our government bureau and our CAD law team. But this unit is also looking outwardly to other states to lend support. Other states either are under attack too, or they don't have the type of restrictions and common sense gun laws that we have in Massachusetts. So we're using this as an opportunity to either file briefs in support of folks who are challenging the laws in these other states. And these are offices who are reaching out to us for support, or we're in communication about best practices, et cetera. Because I often stress I'm not just an AG, I'm a mom of two beautiful boys, and I am exhausted when hearing about another shooting in this country. And feeling as though we can't do anything about it. We can, and the AG offices really are at the forefront. So we're doing a lot of that on a multi-state level. And then lastly, reproductive justice. I'm proud of the reproductive justice unit in our office. And this is not just about reproductive health care and access to reproductive health care. It also is about maternal health and Black maternal health. We've prioritized that issue by even putting out a grant early on, $1.5 million to community-based organizations that are working to close these gaps and these inequities, and to organizations as far as Berkshire County here in Massachusetts. So we do the work with a hyper local lens, but recognizing we have the responsibility, given how blessed we are in Massachusetts, to lend our support, our best practices, our expertise to these other offices and to work across state lines, because that's the only way you're going to be impactful on these major issues, including climate justice and environmental justice as well.
Thank you for that. And as you know, our organization, the Massachusetts Women of Color Coalition, is a big supporter of civic engagement. We talked a little bit about that earlier, and we know how much you care deeply about this. And we've, along the way, you certainly shared about really more women, and particularly women of color to be involved or to get elected, or to, I think also appointed positions are also important for us to think about. And we talked a little bit too about how we can participate or engage your office. Do you have any other recommendations in terms of how we can become more engaged with our either local elected, statewide officials, and just be, be at the table with these conversations when
Yeah.
these conversations are being held. And do you have any other recommendations or feedback you'd like to share about?
I would stress to folks, and it may seem daunting, but it doesn't take long, including if you visit your Secretary of State's website or engage with your local election officials. Or there's several websites, and I'm sure you have information too, and other coalitions do. Mass Vote, I'll see them later tonight for an event. They're nonpartisan, looking to get out there to make sure people have access to the ballot and get out and vote. And they're hosting an event tonight just about how important that is. I would stress you also want to know who your elected officials are. And in Massachusetts, I say it might be a little daunting because a lot of your elected officials are elected and not appointed. So you have folks in city councils or town meeting. Some commissions in various communities are elected bodies. In addition to that, you have county electeds, your sheriffs, your district attorneys, of course, statewide, your governor, your secretary of state, your attorney general, of course. You have folks at the federal level. You have the governor's council, there are a lot of races this year on the governor's council. All of these roles are significant in different ways. And it is incumbent upon us to really educate ourselves on all of the elected officials in our Commonwealth, the roles of their offices, and how it might connect to your daily life, your work responsibilities. And if you get to know that information, find the things you're passionate about and begin to engage with those offices. All of us have websites. All of us have information on our website, social media, different places where you can reach out to us. I obviously come from the city council in Boston and made it my business to be as accessible as I could, from the little things and maybe not so little, my trash was not picked up, or to the bigger policy issues around the Community Preservation Act, which is still in Boston generating millions of dollars for housing. You can't do that work effectively if people are not engaged. So get to know who your elected officials are, their roles and responsibilities. So when something does come up, you know who to go to. And if they're not responsive, then maybe you need to get to your ballot and think about how you hold us all accountable. Because at the end of the day, our job is to serve the people. And it's as simple as that. And only the people can hold us accountable.
Right. I love that because accountability is really important in terms of how we view our work as an organization around civic engagement. And accountability is something that we don't shy away from. So I'm grateful that you mentioned that, because at the end of the day, we want to know what you're doing to support those goals and initiatives in our communities. And if things are working, great. If they're not working, we also want to know. And then, but more importantly, what are you going to do about it? Right?
It's what are we going to do about it? Right.
Right. Exactly.
Right? We have the tools, but our residents have the expertise. They have the passion. They have the story. They have the experience. That if this is done really well, this partnership and collaboration between government and people then becomes the most impactful. I think the two things that always frustrated me about government, including at the local level, was how much money and time we waste not actually helping people. And for me as AG, as I've taken on this bigger platform, it's really looking at our tools and saying we have no time to waste. We cannot waste any money. We have to use everything efficiently and effectively to help our people. And it's our people that really demonstrate to us how to do that exceptionally well. So I just love the collaboration, and we want to expand that. We want more folks engaging with our office, because like you said, we have to do it together, but most importantly, we have to hold each other accountable. That's equally
and we have
important.
to communicate, right? And own that. Yeah, there might not be times that we might have missed that, but you know what can we do to make it better?
That's right.
And I think always having that attitude brings more positive and impactful outcomes.
That's right.
So as I close, I have one last question for you. I wonder if you'd share with us your reflections on what has been made you have had a very notable career. We know that by holding the key offices that you've held as the first woman elected to your former city council district, as the first Black woman to serve as president of the Boston City Council, and as the first Black woman to serve this Commonwealth as our Attorney General. You are an example to other women of what is possible. Briefly, is there a lesson or two that you've learned from these extraordinary experiences that you'd like to share with us, with the audience, before we close? And I like how you said before that it's not just, yes, the first is important to break that ceiling, but it's what we're doing to bring others along. So thank you for saying that.
right.
Could you reflect
Thank you.
on these experiences for us?
Thank you, Celia. And I stand here as the first Black woman AG in Massachusetts, but on the shoulders of so many who came before. And we were talking about John Lewis and many who ensured that folks had the right and not only the right to vote, but access to the ballot, and how critically important that is to ensure that you have elected leadership that reflects the communities we serve. And so I stand on so many that are named and well-known, and so many that are not. And I never take that for granted. And I see it as a responsibility not to be the last, but to ensure that at every level of government here in Massachusetts, if there is a candidate willing to step forward, women of color, who want to take that risk and go for it, I want to be as supportive as I can. I would stress the lessons, at least two worth stressing is, and my life is filled with such, and has been such tragedy early on. And I stand here with, all of my biological parents are deceased. All of my biological grandparents are deceased. My twin brother, Andre, died 12 years ago in the custody of the Department of Correction when he was 29. I still have loved ones who are incarcerated and folks who are still trying to find their way. And so I never take it for granted that I sit here with this incredible job and responsibility as your AG, right? As the AG for the residents of the Commonwealth. And that is because of the grace of God. I feel every single day that the work that I'm doing is purpose-driven. I don't have a lot of money. My husband would say the same. We don't have a lot of money. We have two beautiful kids. But one thing we are dedicated to, and even for our boys, it's not only breaking cycles of poverty and incarceration and all of that, but also living a purpose-driven life. And you only get one. So I encourage folks to really ask the question, the things that you're doing every day, the profession, whatever it is, do you love it? Is it the place you're meant to be with the gifts and skills we have? And I tell young people all the time the same thing. Don't try to be like everybody else. You're here for a unique purpose. You have unique gifts. Now go after the things you're designed to do and maybe destined to do. And so I view my work, including on the city council, as a part of this purpose-driven life. And it's a blessing to serve. That's why I remain so humble in my service. The second piece that I want to just stress is how we view loss. I lost the Boston mayor's race before I ran for attorney general. And I never viewed that loss as a loss, and I'll put this in quotes, or as a detriment or a setback. I looked at it as, what can I learn about myself? What more did I learn about myself? What is it that I'm meant to do? And I kept it in this purpose-driven lane, and the rest is history. So sometimes we may have what others may deem a loss or a setback, and it may be the very thing that needs to happen in order for you to go to the next place. And that's exactly what happened. So I always encourage folks, but especially our young people, to never look at a loss, a missed opportunity through a negative lens. Really shift how you look at it. Who were the people you met? What did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about the folks that you engage with that would allow you to take it to the next opportunity that's meant for you? And I can't stress that enough. I could have been down in the dumps. I was not. I continued in prayer and now have this incredible responsibility to serve our constituents locally and, of course, nationally. And I will never take that for granted. And my job now, of course, as you know, Celia, is like you, right? For us to make sure that the next generation does better than the last. They have access to the opportunities that we've been blessed to have, and that we don't take that for granted and remain humble in our service to our people.
That's so great and just so spot on. Thank you so much for that feedback. It is so important, especially as women of color, as we climb our leadership positions wherever we are, to really start focus on the why and the purpose about what we're doing. And never looking, as you said, as a situation, as a failure. It is one to use as a reflection and a deeper, whatever your spiritual being is, and I know for me it's God, it's always reflecting on what is that thing
Right.
that you have in store for me. And to your point, it's usually even bigger than what you had imagined. So if we
That's right.
think of when something happens or when they say a door closes, to look at it as an opportunity for a greater and more purposeful path, I think that, as you said, the rest is history in terms of the impact that you can have to really help others. So I really appreciate those words of wisdom. I appreciate you being with us today, Attorney Andrea Campbell. And I want to say thank you all and have a good afternoon.